In our last lesson, we talked at great length about how the lives of the Maasais were jeopardized when colonial rule was established throughout Africa. Now, in this lesson, we will be focusing on how the lives of these communities were prior to the colonization of Africa. So, let us now begin this discussion on the pre-colonial Maasai society. Now, the pre-colonial Maasai society was divided among the elders and the warriors. Now, let me tell you something very important in this regard. The pastoral communities, or for that matter any tribal community, have their own systems of governance. Now, they do not follow the laws and patterns of administration that we do in mainstream societies. Instead, they have their own divisions of power, they have their own ways of administering their communities and tribes. Likewise, the pre-colonial Maasai society, as in before colonization had happened in Africa, this society was divided among the elders and the warriors. Now, who were these elders and the warriors who gained importance in the Maasai society? Well, the elders presided over various affairs of the community. Now, these elders were the ones who were more experienced, which is why they presided over different affairs of the communities. And as they presided over different affairs of the communities, the administration of the communities also used to be in their hands. Now, by administration of a tribal community, we do not understand the administration that we see in our world, because here we see different kinds of things happening under the administrative affairs. But in the tribal and pastoralist communities, the administration is very different. It is all about keeping the tribe or the community together and united through thick and thin. And now, these elders of the Maasai society also used to form councils, and these councils were there in order to discuss and settle community disputes. Because disputes are bound to arise when a whole lot of people stay together, and these people were the ones who settled all disputes. These people were the ones who made decisions which were really important to the pastoral community. Having talked about who the elders of the pre-colonial Maasai society were, let us now discuss about the warriors. Now, any tribal community, any pastoral community is always characterized by a sheer sense of courage, bravery, pride. And in order to bring the tribe or the community pride and courage, the warriors fight many wars with other communities. And it is for this reason that the warriors in the pre-colonial Maasai society were given great importance. So, these warriors were groups of young men, and these young men were tasked to do different kinds of things. Firstly, the elders were there to preside over the tribe or community as a whole, and they were the ones who used to make decisions as well as settle disputes, while these young men used to protect the tribe. And when we talked about how pride, courage, bravery are very important to the tribal communities, we can infer that warfare is also a very regular thing among them. Various tribal communities fight amongst themselves in order to proclaim themselves as powerful, which is why these warriors were there to protect their Maasai society from any attack from other communities. Now, these Maasais were a pastoral nomadic group, and we learned that to nomadic pastoralists, cattle is of great importance, because it is with livestock that these people survive, because the various kinds of products that they obtain from livestock are used by them for their sustenance. So, what we can understand from this is that livestock is of great importance to any nomadic pastoralist community, and so it is very valuable to them. Now, it has been a tradition among various African communities to fight and raid each other's cattle. Now, allow me to give you an example in this regard so that you can understand this very clearly. Gold is a very precious metal in our world, and you can see that gold always remains under the threat of theft or robbery simply because it is very precious and valuable. Likewise, cattle is also very valuable to these pastoral communities, which is why cattle is raided by these communities during times of warfare. And these warriors of the pre-colonial Maasai society used to raid cattle so as to prove their manliness, so as to prove the power and the authority of their community. Now, lands are also of great importance to the nomadic pastoral tribes, which is why these warriors protected their lands. They protected the community as a whole. Now, this was a very systematic division of power that was in place prior to colonization of Africa. Now, do you think the warriors and the elders were able to retain their power and importance in the Maasai society after the colonizers came to Africa? Well, it wasn't so, because the colonizers were there in Africa in order to gain control over the people as well as their lands. Now, if the existing social order still continued to be in place, it would mean that the colonizers would not have ultimate power over the people. It would mean that the elders would still preside over different affairs of the Maasai society, and the colonizers couldn't let them exercise their power, which is why now under colonial rule, the elders and the warriors lost their traditional authority. Now, they were already losing their hold over the lands, because these lands were now being brought under cultivation by the colonizers, and now these people, as in the elders as well as the warriors, lost their traditional authority and importance in the Maasai society. And at the same time, the colonial rule also imposed many restrictions on raiding and warfare, because by raiding and warfare, these Maasais remained as autonomous units. They retained their importance and power by raiding cattle of other communities as well as by waging war with different nomadic communities. And the colonizers could not let this happen, which is why restrictions were also imposed on these activities. So, from this we can understand how the existing social order in the Maasai society was completely replaced under colonial rule. Now, simultaneously with supplanting the existing social order with new systems of governance, the colonial rule also bred inequalities among the people who lived in the Maasai community. How was this done? Now, the colonizers extended the positions of chiefs to some of the Maasai people, and these chiefs over time were able to accumulate wealth. And by accumulating wealth, these chiefs now left the villages in search of jobs to the cities and the towns. Now, the wives and children of these chiefs continued to remain in the villages in order to take care of their animals. And now, in this way, the chiefs were able to escape the very harsh effects of poverty as well as droughts and famines which broke out in the villages. But what do you think happened to those people who were not made chiefs by the colonizers? Well, these people still continued to remain like very poor pastoralists. They did not have the wealth or the resources which were required to sail through these periods of hardship. Moreover, when famines broke out, when droughts happened, when warfare happened, these poor people lost even the very little they had. All their grazing lands were already taken away by the colonizers, and now these people had no real way of sustaining themselves. which is why the colonial rule now started creating a rift within the Maasai society itself. Firstly, the Maasai land was broken up into several parts, and now this community as a whole got broken up into several categories, and the rift between the rich and the poor became even more gaping and even more explicit than ever. Now all this while we have been talking about how the Maasai's lives were jeopardized by colonial rule. Well, it will be wrong to assume that it were only the Maasai's lives which were put to severe threat by the colonial rule, because this is the same fate that was shared by various nomadic pastoralist communities throughout Africa. Now this map zooms in on the southwestern African country of Namibia, where we can locate two regions which are the Kaukoland and the Ovamboland. Now these two regions were the places throughout which the Kaukoland herders moved prior to the colonization of Africa. Now the Kaukoland herders also used their livestock in order to earn a living. So they used to sell animal skin, meat and various other trade products in the neighboring markets. So they were free to move across these regions. So they lived quite a self-sufficient and self-sustaining life before the colonizers took control over their regions. Now what do you think happened to them when the Kaukoland herders lost control over their lives and lands? Now before proceeding with this lesson and finding out how the lives of the Kaukoland herders changed during colonial rule, let me ask you a question. The Kaukoland herders lived in the southeastern African country of Mozambique. Do you think this statement is true or false? Well, the correct answer is that this statement is false, because the Kaukoland herders did not live in Mozambique. Instead, they used to live in the southwestern African country called Namibia. Now when colonial rule happened in Africa, it imposed strict restrictions on the Kaukoland herders' mobility. We learnt about those two regions as in the Kaukoland and Ovamboland, which were the places throughout which the Kaukoland herders used to move and perform trade activities. But now they were no longer able to do so. And at the same time, in these regions now sprang up white settlements. Now here comes the racial politics in play, because these people are of a different race from that of the Europeans. And so the Europeans held these people with suspicion. And these black people were not allowed to enter the white settlements. So their movement was not restricted only in that region, but they were not allowed to move beyond a certain space. They now had to form their own small confined settlements within which they were restricted to live. And if they by any chance entered the white settlements, they were now imprisoned. So can you understand how oppressive the colonial rule and its effects were on the lives of the Kaukoland herders? Because their lives were now severely impacted simply because they were no longer able to move freely across their regions. And at the same time, the colonial rule also imposed restrictions on trade activities. So the Kaukoland herders were not even able to trade the various kinds of products that they formerly used to do in order to earn their living. And unfortunately enough, this eventually led to this community's decline over the years. How long can a community sustain itself when its social order, when its ways of living are threatened by a new social order? It cannot happen for long, and likewise the Kaukoland herders also declined and waned away over time. So let us now quickly gloss over the various points that we have been discussing pertaining to the impact of colonial rule on the lives of nomadic pastoralists. Firstly, we learnt about how mobility is a very important factor for the sustenance of nomadic pastoralists, because if they cannot move freely across the regions, they would not be able to sustain themselves. They would not be able to look for proper pastures for their livestock. And it happened because the colonial rule imposed many restrictions on mobility. So, the mobility that these people used to enjoy freely was now lost under colonial rule. And at the same time, the nomadic pastoralists have had very innate relationships with the forests, with the regions that they have stayed in for so long, but now they lost their customary rights over pasture lands. For this reason, they were no longer able to feed their huge numbers of livestock. So, all in all, their lives were severely threatened. And they were not even able to sustain themselves by looking for newer employment opportunities. So, their existing social life, their existing way of living was now completely threatened. So, the nomadic pastoralists lost their lands and lives, so to speak. But the nomadic pastoralists also realized that they cannot continue like this for long. They would also need to adapt to the changes in the societies, in the ways of governance, because they were the ones who used to live in the open forested regions. They were the ones who have always shared a very intricate relationship with nature and environment. Now, over time, these pastoralists realized that they cannot continue like that for long, which is why they now need to adapt to the oncoming changes. So, what have they done? Firstly, many pastoral tribes have reduced the number of cattle simply because they cannot find sufficient pastures to feed the cattle. And at the same time, they are now pressing the governments in order to grant them their land rights. They are also pressing the governments so that they are allowed different kinds of subsidies, so that they are allowed proper irrigation and water resources. So, this is a way in which we can understand that the lives of the pastoralists are now caught up in a state of transition. They are not really living like the way they used to do 100 or 200 years ago, but at the same time that existing life has not been completely changed and they have not been incorporated in the mainstream society to a complete extent. So, they are now somewhere living between the old order and the new social orders. But in no way are we to assume that the pastoral nomadists are a thing of the past. They very much exist in today's world. Now, they are the ones who are very conscious about the environment. They are the ones who are very fond of the environment. Because with the modern activities that we perform today, we contribute to the deterioration of the environment as a whole. But these are people who do not pollute the environment. Instead, they have very beautiful bonds and relationships with the nature. They allow nature to heal when they move from one place to another, and in this way vegetation cover grows. Now, the practices that they perform do not require irrigation facilities, which is why they also do not consume a lot of water from earth. Now, their practices are very well suited for hilly and dry regions, and environmentalists themselves are of this opinion that the nomadic pastoralists create very sustainable ways of using the resources of environment. And these people are the ones who are conscious about the environment. And so, it is imperative on our part to take a lesson from these pastoralists, as in how we should use the environment without polluting it, without completely ravaging and devastating it. So, this brings us to an end of our discussion on pastoralists in the modern world. In this series of lessons, we have talked at great length what we understand by the practice of nomadic pastoralism. We have also focused on great length on the lives of many nomadic pastoral communities that used to live and still live in India. Subsequently, we talked about how the lives of those Indian pastoral communities were brought under threat following the onset of colonial rule in the country. After that, we went on to discussing about the pastoralists of a new continent, that is the continent of Africa. We have learned at great length about the lives of the Maasais as it were before and after colonial rule. And subsequently, we talked about how the lives of the pastoralists have changed in the modern world. So this brings us to a conclusion of this long series of discussions on pastoralists in the modern world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.